So this is part 2 of the second video for week 3 on, and this one is on Holland's theory of types. I apologize, in part 1 of this particular set of videos, I ended the previous one a little abruptly and forgot to say we're going to stop and pause here. So if you haven't watched that first part of the video, this would be week 3, part 2A. So if you haven't watched that, please go and watch that video before you begin to view this one, as this one really builds on what was presented in that previous video. So we had just finished looking at the 6 different preferences: realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional, that are part of Holland's theory of types. And that was looked at within the context of step 1, so helping to understand the individual's personality. And then we can go on to step 2, again following Parsons' model, obtaining knowledge about the world of work. So Holland's 6 categories also provide a means for classifying and learning about occupations, and in particular the environment that you would encounter in these different occupations. It's important to note here that most environments and people involve a combination of types, and so what Holland does is use the 3 strongest codes to identify the combination for a particular individual or environment. So for example, someone who scores high on realistic, artistic, and social would have a code of R for realistic, A for artistic, and S for social. So you will see as we work through the rest of this presentation that we look at those 3 letters as a way to identify an individual's personality, preferences, and type, as well as the environment that they would prefer to work in. So there are many ways to measure these 3, basically measure the preferences and come up with the 3-letter code to combine the types. And there are 3 instruments listed here: the vocational preference inventory, the self-directed search, and the strong interest inventory. And you will have an opportunity in a few minutes to try out a couple of variations that are based on Holland's 6 types. And what we're trying to do here is to match people and environments using the types. So it can be useful when you're listening to a client's work history and the things that they've enjoyed and the things that they haven't enjoyed, to think in terms of the 6 types of people and environments. So when you're using Holland's theory with clients, you're aiming to try and match the individual's 3-letter code with the appropriate occupational groupings that fit with that 3-letter code. So for example, if you have a client who has the 3 preferences of, let's say, artistic, enterprising, and social, I'm looking, as I'm saying this, at the ONET database, and I'll post a link to ONET on under week 3 on Blackboard. The ONET is organized around Holland's codes. So if I put in the 3 letters, artistic, social, and enterprising, it comes up with a whole list. One occupation, for example, that appears there is adult basic and secondary education and literacy teachers and instructors. That tends to fulfill the preferences of social, artistic, and enterprising, and there are a few others that are on the list. So I'll put the link to ONET under week 3 so that you can experiment with it. And once you do your own preferences on the tools that I'm going to give you in a moment, you could actually go to ONET and look up your 3-letter code and see what turns up under ONET. So that's step 2. We want to help the client to identify in step 1 their strongest preferences, the top 3. We want to, in step 2, help them identify occupations and environments that fit with those preferences. And then again, with Parsons' model, we look at step 3, integrating information about self and the world of work. So we take the person and we take the environment and we put those things together to try and develop a match between these 2 different aspects. There are several other concepts that are important to consider as part of Holland's theory. So first of all, the concept of congruence. That is the relationship of personality to the work environment. So as we are trying to match the individual's codes with the codes represented in the work environment, the more similar the personality is to the environment, the greater the congruence and more likely greater satisfaction. So congruence has to do with similarity between the person's preferences and the preferences that are reflected in the environment. So congruence decreases as similarity in the three-letter code decreases between the individual and the environment. So for example, a person with a type code of SAE, Social Artistic Enterprising, would experience less congruence in an environment with a code of RIC, a Realistic, Investigative, and Conventional. So we want to consider the idea of high versus low congruence. So here we have, if we look at these two here, this is the person's preferences. You can see, person's preferences for social and investigative are fairly high. And the environment that they're working in also provides, or that they're considering to work in, also provides a very high social and investigative codes. So the environment is a good match here with the individual. If we have low congruence, we can see that this individual's, for example, investigative is their strongest and social is their second strongest. And if we look over here at the environment, we can see that investigative and social are lower in this particular environment. And this could be the environment the person's working in now, or it could be the environment reflected in an occupation that they're considering. So we want to, wherever possible, try to aim for high congruence between the person and the environment, which will increase the likelihood that they will be satisfied in their working environment and in their occupation. Another important concept is the idea of differentiation, which refers to how well defined the types are for a person or an environment. So some people may have one or two dominant or well differentiated types. That means that they're clearly defined what their interests are. Others may present a flat or undifferentiated profile with equal interests in most or all types. So you can see here, imagine these are two different clients. So client A has a very clear preference for the enterprising type of occupations, clear preference for enterprising in terms of their own codes as well as the environment that might fit for them. The bottom client, client B, has very low differentiation. Now, what this could mean is that they could go into this any kind of environment and be somewhat satisfied. So this can be an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. So the person who has high differentiation, this can be helpful because they have good clarity about what they want. But if they're targeting an industry that is struggling economically, going through a downturn, jobs are less plentiful, and they're unable to really find anything else that would interest them, that could be a challenge. And as I said, someone who has low differentiation, that may mean that they could go into a lot of different occupations and be satisfied, but it also may pose problems for them in actually making a choice because it seems like everything might interest them. So work environments can also vary in terms of differentiation, of course. So some environments provide more freedom and option to do a wider variety of activities than others. So some environments, if someone has a high need for differentiation, some environments may fit for them better because they can do a lot of different things. So for example, working on an assembly line versus being a university professor, you can see the former would be very repetitive, the latter would provide more freedom to do a number of different activities. So undifferentiated environments may provide fewer options if the individual loses interest in work or they can't do the work any longer, if the environment is somewhat unforgiving that they must be doing work where they're standing on their feet or they're working in a factory doing repetitive motions and they become injured, then it becomes a challenge for them to find another option in that environment. So as I've already said, undifferentiated clients may have difficulty making career decisions because they like and or are good at a lot of things. Highly differentiated clients may have difficulty making choices if they're required to change occupations or they don't have the skills to do the one thing that they want to do. So another important concept is the concept of consistency. This refers to the similarity or dissimilarity of types. So certain types have more in common with some types than others, and the closer they are to each other on the chart, the more consistent their characteristics are. So for example, when we look at the chart, I'm sorry, I'll just backtrack here for a moment. When we look at the chart, we can see that the social and artistic and enterprising occupations are all close together. So they tend to have some similarity to each other as opposed to let's say, investigative versus enterprising. Investigative, often has to do with being in scientific occupations, maybe doing research, maybe working in a laboratory on complex problems, maybe not interacting with people quite so much. Whereas enterprising has to do with being pretty action-oriented, interacting with people a lot, having things move quickly. So you can see that some of these, the further away they are from each other on the image here, the less similar they are to each other. So what we look for is, for example, I think the example I gave a few minutes ago was artistic, social, and enterprising, and those three codes are very close together. So that means an individual with those three codes would be quite consistent. They would have high consistency in terms of their codes. When codes are very different from each other, so if you have someone with the codes of, let's say, conventional, artistic, and investigative, then it might be harder. You'll find there are fewer occupations that reflect that unique combination of codes. So let me just go back to the slides about consistency and just explain that a bit more. So for example, social and artistic types, as I've said, are close together, while social and realistic types are further apart and quite different. So consistency also applies to work environments. So some environments, in fact, do require an unusual combination of skills and interests that are generally inconsistent. So, for example, athletic trainers, if you look at the codes of social, realistic, and enterprising, they're somewhat spread out on that diagram, but athletic trainers have to be able to interact well with people. So that's the social aspect of it. Realistic, they work with their hands-on with their clients, and enterprising and persuasive in the sense of trying to motivate individuals to aim for better performance or work through an injury. So this is an unusual combination of codes. So we've already kind of talked about this, but if you look at this diagram, you can identify the Holland types that are consistent with each other and inconsistent. So realistic and investigative obviously are close together. They would be a little bit more consistent than investigative and enterprising. Social and enterprising are closer together than realistic and investigative. So you can just get a sense of, and this is not to say that if someone has codes that are inconsistent, that's a bad thing. So it's just to understand that they have, sort of some conflicting preferences, some unusual combination of preferences, and may have to work a little bit harder to find an occupation that meets their needs in all of those areas. Another important concept is the concept of identity, and this refers to clarity and stability of a person's current and future goals, as well as the stability of the working environment. So helping clients to clarify their identity can be an important goal of career counseling, and quite often when you're working with people who are quite young, they are still working on developing their identity, or perhaps someone has had a midlife crisis or a major transition that's caused them to question everything they've ever done in their career. So sometimes people's identity is unclear, and what they want in terms of career and occupation is unclear. So that's part of the role that you are going to play in helping clients to kind of revisit that question, who am I, and to use that information to make good career choices and decisions. So achievement of identity may occur when the goal of congruence has been accomplished. So when you have an occupation that brings together your preferences, the things that you feel passionate about, for example, and provides you with an environment that fulfills those needs, then we can often feel like our identity is confirmed by our work. We can feel invested in our work and feel like it's meeting our needs on a lot of different levels. So we can have a clear versus a diffuse identity. So people who have a clear identity tend to have more stability in terms of what they're looking for and the goals that they pursue. They seem to be able to articulate their career plans a little more clearly. They often have contingency or backup plans. They often have, fitting with Parsons' model, good knowledge of self in step 1, good knowledge of work in step 2, and good job search strategies in step 3, or just good strategies in general to help them move towards their goals. Individuals who have a more diffused identity may tend to be less stable. For example, they may jump from job to job just because they're not clear about what they want. They may have difficulty stating their career plans and identifying goals, and not having good contingency plans to back up if the things that they are doing tend to be discontinued in some way. They may not have good knowledge of themselves and knowledge of the world of work. And again, it's not unusual for very young people or people who've gone through difficult transitions to struggle with some of these issues and may not know how to set goals and pursue goals, whether it's finding work or making career decisions. So we want to help our clients to identify that these are challenges and to work them through so that we can help them preferably at least develop a clear sense of who they are, a sense of what they want, understanding of the world of work, and then again in Parsons' 3-step model, that third step, put those two things together and see if they can then identify some specific occupations they would like to pursue. There are some sources of occupational information that are organized using Holland's codes, such as the Occupation Finder, the Education Finder, ONET, which I've mentioned, and I'll post the link for that, the Dictionary of Holland Occupational Codes. So it has formed the basis for a lot of different resources that provide lists of occupations organized around those codes. So you may want to use these resources with clients, but please do ensure that you supplement them with Canadian-based resources such as the NOC. And we will explore these resources more fully in the second semester in the course Career and Employment Resources. So I'm going to invite you to pause here for a few minutes and to try one or both of these online tests to assess your Holland codes. These are both free. You can copy either link above and paste it into your browser and try both of these tests. They each take about 5 to 10 minutes. Then you will be able to submit your answers and you will see a graph showing your scores on the 6 scales, and your 3-letter code, which is your strongest scores, will be provided. Make a note of your 3-letter code and the strength of your scores. If the website doesn't allow you to download or save your results, you may want to take a screenshot using your phone or laptop before leaving the page. Please note that I will not be looking specifically at your results, and you will not have to share your results. I'll be inviting you in just a moment to respond to some questions on the discussion board, but you don't have to share your results and disclose that information to anybody unless you would like to do so. So please pause here and go and click on these links on week 3 and then give them a try and then come back to this lecture. We just have a few more slides to review. So once you have your results, I'm going to invite you to post your comments on the week 3 discussion board about your experience of doing one or both of these tests by answering any or all of the questions provided below. And as I said, you don't have to share your actual Holland codes unless you want to, but I would like you to comment on what was it like for you to do either or both of these online tests. Was it easy? Was it hard? Was it confusing? And why? And on looking at your results, based on what you know now of the Holland codes, did these results seem to fit for you? Why or why not? And if you did both of these tools, were the results consistent? Did they come up generally with the same 2 or 3 codes as being the strongest? And then lastly, would you recommend either or both of these online tests to clients, and why or why not? So I invite you to answer all of these questions or none of these questions, and again, you don't have to share your actual Holland codes unless you would like to. So that brings us to the end of the second part of the week 3 lecture. And what you will need to do now for this week, your first assignment is due at the end of this week. It is your case study, part 1. You're going to read the case study and prepare your responses to the questions provided in the instruction package. So that instruction package is posted under week 3. It's also posted on Blackboard under course assignments and due dates, so you can find it in either place. But please do review that instruction package and video thoroughly before you begin to work on the assignment. Once you put your answers together for the questions, please submit them directly to me through Blackboard by midnight Sunday of this week, the end of week 3. And then in preparation for next week, please read Chapter 7 in the Scharf textbook. And so that's it for this week. As always, please let me know if you have any questions, concerns, areas of confusion, and I will look forward to seeing your assignments at the end of the week.